Well, good morning. Appreciate you tuning in here again. And here we are broadcasting from sunny Stuart right off the St. Lucie River. This show this week is going to be very important. It's hottest headlines going on around right now, and that's the border crisis. And KW, my side co-host here, is not in the studio with me today because, KW, where are you?
Well, Casey, we are in Arizona this week. We've been down in working our way through the counties of the border with Mexico up into kind of central Arizona, really trying to find out what is really happening with this immigration crisis that we're seeing on the news.
So this is exciting news. You are boots on the ground. You're in Arizona. There's so much going on with this immigration crisis. Basically, to recap a little bit, Biden, with executive orders, had changed some of the regulations Trump had in place, namely catch and release is back in place. And that's really one of those systems where they can apply for asylum and they come here to the United States and they are released while they're waiting for their court date into the general population. So Trump had a policy that they could apply for asylum in their home countries, and then they would come when their court date was set, because court dates can take months and weeks. So that's one really big issue that we're faced with out there. To the fact that the Mexican president is actually calling President Biden the migrant president. So what are you seeing out there, KW?
Well, first thing, Casey, is the one thing that you're hearing on the news that I would say is absolutely true is, of course, the migrants are not staying at the border, and that's really the issue. They're moving quickly into the heartland of the country. And they're not staying anywhere near Arizona, Phoenix or Tucson. They're moving somewhere into America, and we just haven't been able to track down where. But there seems to be, outside of the children, there seems to be a well-orchestrated plan to move these people, into the heartland of the U.S. So, that's the first thing I want to point out is that, these people are not coming into the country and staying, in these border communities. They're moving quickly into, communities near you, so to speak. And so that's the big challenge that we're trying to grapple with, which is where are they going, and who's going to feed them, who's going to house them, who's going to take care of their medical care, and things, all of the social costs and all of the social concerns, in addition to the bigger concerns, which are are there any terrorists that are slipping through the cracks? Are there any gang members? Is the drug trade wide open again? And so that's kind of what we're looking at right now.
And with that, I know even back in February, CBP arrested, it was a group of 11 Iranians that crossed the border right in Yuma, Arizona, and that's one of the biggest concerns you just mentioned, terrorism. When we're opening the borders up like this, what is to stop the terrorists from the Middle East or wherever they happen to come from crossing over that border? We've lost control.
Well, that's right, and that's one of the themes that I put out right away was, essentially we have lost control of the U.S. border with Mexico, and really 4 states. It's California, it's Arizona, New Mexico, and it's Texas. So those are the 4 states that we've really essentially, for lack of better terms, given control of the U.S. border back over to the drug cartels. And that is not a fictional statement. That's a factual statement, Casey.
What about the residents out there in Arizona? I'm sure you've been speaking with a lot of people. You've been down there since at least the beginning of the week, so you've had some time to cover the ground. What are you hearing?
Well, they're disgusted, frankly. Arizona is they're proud people, and it's a very entrepreneurial state, so to speak. They have had immigration trickles for years, and there's no discrimination against normal and customary immigration. Arizona has a big Latino community, of course, but the biggest issue here, I would say, is the Latino community. And I can speak, so to speak, for Arizona, but I think you're going to see this to be the case in the other border states. The Latino community that is here is against this open border process. They are absolutely against it.
Well, there's certainly a way to come here legally, right? And for those that are following the proper channels, to have other people be able to just come in the border and the catch and release program, just assimilate into the population without having any documentation. I think anybody would be frustrated with that. They followed the protocols. Why doesn't everybody have to? You know.
Well, that's right. You know, and the what's happening. What's happening is, you know, they are being. The problem is they are basically being persecuted to a certain degree by virtue of these open border policies, because they're here, they're working. You know, we're talking about legal Latino immigrant communities. We're not talking about the illegals that are already in the country. We're talking about folks that have had second, third generation. You know, have got kids in college, or whatever. They've been here for a while. You know, they're not for this. And you know, if you look at for example, the Border Patrol, who the composition of the Border Patrol, you have second and third generation Latinos that are members of the Border Patrol that are against it. So this is not just one particular segment. These are the folks that that have been here for quite some time, and they reside in the state of Arizona. They reside along the border communities all the way up through Phoenix and Tucson, and it's having a profound effect on them, because they're basically feeling the blowback from this crisis.
And certainly, you mentioned and touched on the fact that gangs can take advantage of this. Reuters was just reporting, one Mexican official said organized crime began changing its modus operandi from the day Biden took office, and now exhibited unprecedented levels of sophistication. Their migrants have become a commodity. They're valuable as drug runners. They have found higher concentrations of migrants at the border areas have encouraged gangs to recruit them as drug mules and kidnap others for money. So there's a lot of danger involved with this as well.
Well, that's the biggest. That you hit the nail on the head. That's the biggest focus that I've been working on, which is the fact that this is not outside of minor children, which are being used as pawns, for the bigger human trafficking factors that we're seeing. The reality is that the people that are coming across the border, the teenage boys, they're going to be used for multiple things. They're going to be used for drug mules going forward. They're indentured. Let's put it this way, Casey. The able-bodied, 12 to 13 to 14-year-old boys and girls that are coming across the border, once they clear, either get released into the community or somehow get back, away from the border detention centers, they're going to be basically indentured to somebody. And the reality is they're going to be indentured to the drug cartels in one way, shape, or form or another, because that's who controls how they got into the United States. So whether they turn out to be, gang members over time, whether they turn out to be, drug runners, whether they turn out to be prostitutes, the females, whether they turn out to be something other than that, the reality is it's not just, we have a group of people who, have been persecuted on paper in a country that are coming to the United States, and they're going to start up a new life. These people are coming into the United States owing somebody, and they're not going to have a new life. They're going to basically be brought into a very dark place, and that's really the challenge we're facing, which is, for the most part, these people are indentured to the drug cartels. We'll call it the adult age women and children, which are, at this point, I'd call it, 12, 13 years older and higher.
And that's certainly, we're going to talk a little bit more in depth about the children here. And know that the number of migrants that are arriving here at the border is on pace to be the highest in 20 years. There are so many that are coming, and many of them are unaccompanied children. They're not with adults. In fact, you were talking about the teenage boys. The Biden administration's opened up several emergency shelters for the children in Texas. And the Dallas Convention Center, you remember that during the hurricanes? They're opening that up to house 3,000 migrant teenage boys. And Biden's enlisted FEMA, who is now deployed to shelter and transport children till at least June. So this is a really big issue. And KW, I've done a lot of shows on human trafficking, and this is very real. It's terribly sad. These poor kids, you're right, they're owned by somebody else. They're not going to have freedom. And that's putting a face on this. That's the real sad part about opening the border the way that we have, the advantage that these drug lords will take of these children.
Well, let's be very direct about it, Casey. The U.S. federal government, the Biden-Harris administration, is aiding and abetting, facilitating, and promoting human trafficking. Okay, it's not. That's a bold statement. It's a fact. The U.S. federal government, the Biden-Harris, the liberal leftist regime, is promoting, facilitating, and willingly and purposely helping, essentially, human trafficking, and human trafficking on all levels. Okay, we're talking about, every dark piece of human trafficking you can associate with.
Well, in this catch and release program, it's known that if you bring children, it's easier to apply for asylum. So what's happening here is, some of these kids are being rented out, if you want to say, by their parents to and people they don't even know, so that they can cross the border with a child in hopes of being able to apply for asylum quicker. I was kind of looking a little bit online, KW, and Customs and Border Patrol agent Delgado is working down in the Texas area. And he said he saw several times children being rented out to help illegal aliens try to game the system. The parents are poor, and a stranger offers to pay them $1,000 to use their child. The parent's going to take that because they need the incentive. Delgado said, "You have a child's life in strangers' hands, and these children are vulnerable. They're actually the ones who need the help. They're brought there against their will and have no say about where they're going, whether it's mom or dad, aunt or uncle, or some stranger getting something out of it."
Well, that's the reality, Casey. It's the children are being bought and sold and traded, and look,
and they're lost in the population.
These detention centers, there'll be handlers waiting for them. Okay, under the guise of supervisors, we'll call it guardians. We would probably call that in the normal terms, but these guardians are nothing more than handlers that will put these children into the sex trade or the drug trade or something. Almost all the female girls will go into the sex trade. They'll be bought and sold, and they'll be indentured.
And they're lost. They're lost in population. We have no way of tracking them because they're undocumented. The males, as you said, many of them will be drug runners. Commissioner Bruners thank you for joining us today. She said the devastation and danger to get votes is so cruel. And, she's just dismayed about what's happening to these children, as we all are. And that's really the big story here, the unintended consequences of becoming the migrant president. The kids are paying for it.
Well, and you have to look at, okay, that, in addition to the human suffering, I also put out a little note when we got on the ground here, and I said, look, folks, let's be clear. Besides all of the dark human trafficking related issues, what this is really all about for the liberal and leftist party, the Biden-Harris and their handlers, is cheap votes and cheap labor. Okay, and that's outside of the human trafficking element, what they're really looking for is to create a cheap voting base, okay, to propel the leftist agenda, and more importantly, cheap labor that is going to hurt the American worker long term, because most of these laborers that don't go into indenture, or they come out of indenture, they still have to work. They work for cash under the table, and therefore that hurts the American worker across the board, especially when you talk about the numbers that we're projecting, Casey. Right now, if it continues the way it's going, the numbers are projected to be 5 million on the low side, 10 million on probably the high side over the next 24 months. It's not a million. We're talking 5 to 10 million across the board into the United States, in addition to the current 15 to 20 million illegal immigrants, aliens that are already here. So let's just say that we wound up with 25 million undocumented illegal aliens in the United States. 25 million, okay? And, of course, maybe a large portion of them will be indentured, but at the end of the day, they will essentially hurt the U.S. economy in so many ways. And so what they're really doing is hurting the U.S. worker, and they're really hurting, the fabric of our society. And that's what the leftist liberal agenda is really all about: cheap labor, cheap votes, and they're promoting. And look, for a fact, they know they're doing this. They know that they're promoting human trafficking. They're not stupid. They're fully aware that this is what they're doing, and the American people need to understand that.
KW, they do. Again, this is Casey reporting from Stuart, Florida, and KW is out in Arizona, and we're talking about the border crisis today. You're 100% right. You're touching on the impacts to the American economy, the human trafficking. That's so sad. We have such an issue with it, with our laws and regulations that are in place. So now opening these borders up, and frankly, the parents in Honduras and Mexico are being encouraged to rent their kids out to who knows what kind of person. It could be a nefarious person. It could be somebody honestly trying to escape poverty, just for the fact that when they get to the border, the United States is more likely to welcome them with children. We're creating this environment that is beyond dangerous for the children. And you talked about how many people could come into the United States. Here's some facts that were just released, just so people realize how many more migrants are crossing the border than there was just a year ago. Around in Texas and Arizona. In Yuma, 49% more from a year ago. Tucson, 30% more. San Diego, 61% more. Rio Grande, 73% more. Big Bend, 141% more. Del Rio, 122% more. El Paso, 96% more. These numbers are staggering.
No, they're off the charts, and that's why I brought it out. I mean, we're talking about 5 to 10 million new illegal immigrants in the next 24 months. In 24 months, Casey, people don't understand how bad this is.
They don't understand. And, ending catch and release, in my opinion, is really a huge mistake. We were finally trying to get our illegal immigration issue controlled. And now with this catch and release. And again, folks, what that is the folks come in over the border, they apply for asylum, and then they're basically turned out into the public until their court date. Many times they don't return for their court date, so they're lost. They're undocumented. Where when Trump had ended catch and release, they applied for asylum in their own home country, and then they came to the United States when their court date was set. So really big difference there. Do you see any of the states, KW, that are maybe trying to enact, and can they, their own programs such as ending catch and release, let's say just in Arizona?
Well, are you talking about to counter catch and release? To
yes,
counter with the
to counter, yes, to eliminate it. Yes, to eliminate it. Are states able to do that, or they have to abide by the federal laws because it's Customs and Border, Patrol, a federal agency?
Well, here's the problem. Okay, look, the leftist regime is very smart. Okay, they're basically they put a lot of hooks into the $1.9 trillion stimulus, and they're going to put a lot of hooks into the theoretical $3 trillion quote-unquote infrastructure bill that they're trying to pass, right? Remember back in June 1st, 2020, I came out and said, folks, wake up. We're going to have a $5 trillion ask here from the left. Okay, it's documented. We did that interview. We did that live video that we blew internet up. We had millions and millions of viewers that said that. How can that be? Well, how can it be? It's here. 5 trillion's here. 1.9 trillion, 3 trillion plus the prior stimulus bill. And my point on that is there's hooks in that, Casey, and the hooks are you got to play ball if you want the money. Okay, so so the problem is the states want money. Okay, even the red states want money. Arizona wants money, but if they take federal money, they've got to play by the federal rules, and the federal rules are you can't go against essentially our protocols on immigration, etc. Nobody really follows that, but that's essentially what's happening. So now you'll have sheriffs who will round up. That's why I'm up in central Arizona today. Sheriff will round up the immigrants, but the problem is they don't have any place to put them. So they round them up, and then they basically, they cut them loose because there's nowhere to put them, and there's no protocol to process them. So essentially, what's been created is, I kind of liken it to pulling the plug on the drain. You can't stop the water; it's just flowing. And without that safety net of having some ability to detain and document these people, and somehow at least have a period of time where you can, get some sort of immigration hook into them, they're basically just walking across the border without any recognizance. Now, that has a lot of implications for the U.S. And if you don't mind, let me elaborate.
Go right ahead.
1993, I was a young banker in New York City, and I worked for Chase Manhattan Bank, and I was right next to the World Trade Center. I would have meetings over there. So I was in the Vista Hotel when the first terrorist bomb went off. The building shook, and for those that understand, that was the first time the kind of the bad actors, the terrorists that were targeting the U.S. They wanted a high priority target, tried to blow up the World Trade Center.
Right.
They essentially put a truck bomb, in the parking garage under the Vista Hotel. It blew out 3 floors, but it wasn't powerful enough to take anything down. Okay, fast forward to 9/11, excuse me, and they got a little more sophisticated, and they flew planes into the towers. I worked at 1 World Trade Center, 2 World Trade Center, and 4 World Trade Center of my career when I was in New York before I went overseas. And I was on my way back up to a meeting. At that time, I had been coming back into New York, and they hit the towers. And so what I said to essentially the world when we started to see these open borders is, look, if you think that 9/11 was bad, wait till you see what they're going to do next, because we're talking about hardened terrorists that have been trained, that they know how to make. They're sophisticated beyond belief compared to 9/11. These are people that are coming out of Afghanistan. They're coming out of Iraq, Iran, Syria, other bad places, essentially Eastern Africa, Somalia. They're hardened criminal terrorists, and they know how to do bad things. They're walking across our border, Casey, with the help of the drug cartels. They're paying big money, and they're coming in. And that's the biggest concern I have. Yeah, we have a human crisis, but what I'm really focused on is, at the end of the day, what are the bad actors going to do to the United States, and what are they going to hit? We don't know, but we're going to find out, and everybody's going to ask, how did this happen? And the sad part is, we're going to look back and say, because we opened our borders, okay, and we have no recourse, and you would think, how in the world could this country ever get to this point where we have open borders, 4 states with open borders, where every terrorist could walk across the border without recourse after 9/11? It's unbelievable.
I agree with you, KW. It's frightening, actually. Not everybody is secure with their airports as the United States is. And, to have open borders through Mexico, it's inviting anybody to come in. And at the top of the hour, I had mentioned that they had arrested a group of 11 Iranians in Yuma in early February. I also remember a story last fall where there was a group of women. I don't remember if they were Iranian. They were from the Middle East that were found and arrested as well. But they were out in the desert, just absolutely parched. And you have to wonder if they weren't sentinels sent ahead just to test it out, see if you can get across that border, because that's what they do. They're women, they're dispensable in the Middle East, let's face it. And here we are now in February. There's 11 Iranians. How many haven't we seen, right?
That's right. For those who lost their lives, and whether it be the Twin Towers, or whether they had service members who lost their lives in Afghanistan afterwards, in Iraq, who basically went in under the guise of cleaning out Al Qaeda and ISIS. What was the purpose of that loss of life, Casey, if we now have open borders in the U.S. and every bad actor who wants to do bad things to the United States can just fundamentally walk across at the invitation of the Biden-Harris liberal leftist regime? And it has nothing to do with politics. It has to do with national security. But I think fundamentally they're inviting terrorism into the country, because when you have open borders, you are inviting terrorists. You're inviting bad actors, in addition to human trafficking, drug smuggling. It's criminal. We are looking at, essentially what the United States government is doing today is nothing less than criminal activity by allowing this to happen. And I think that's the feeling of the people. If you really want to know what the people of Arizona think, they believe that the U.S. government is basically conducting criminal acts by opening these borders and letting these people into their state, but they're not staying in Arizona. They're moving through Arizona. They're going into the heartland of the U.S., all across the U.S. Look, the fentanyl trade, that's a China originated issue that basically the Chinese communist government cuts deals with the criminal gangs in Mexico to essentially infiltrate the U.S. with commercial grade fentanyl. And that doesn't go to Phoenix or Tucson, just Phoenix, Tucson. It goes all over the U.S.
It's
Okay,
a yes.
look at Minnesota. Now, whatever happens in the George Floyd trial is going to be, a jury selection. But George Floyd was jacked up on fentanyl. I mean, so the point of the matter is, it's a U.S. national crisis.
It absolutely is. And you're bringing up an excellent point. Just because they're crossing in Arizona, New Mexico, Texas, California, we don't know where they go after they cross because they're undocumented. This is the whole problem. And who knows where they're going to end up. Here in South Florida, we have, the freight trains, and they have been wanting to transport LNG, which is an extremely flammable, explosive gas that's stored cryogenically. So when air hits it, it explodes. It's lighter than air. The flames literally can float in the air and move out miles. So that is something that we're concerned about here. A terrorist can hit a train very easily. You don't know what their next plan is. If we're talking about it, they've already thought it. So these are very frightening days that our borders are open and we don't know who's coming across the border. And my goodness, in America, if you want to have a better life and you want to get out of poverty, that's what we're about. And we're going to, with the proper channels, look at those cases. But it's those cases that are here for nefarious reasons we're not able to control this way.
Well, Casey, you're right, and the reality is this: the world is a dangerous place, and the world is a dark place right now in many instances. And the fact that we, what's the purpose? What's the purpose of U.S. citizenship? What's the purpose of being a sovereign nation? What's the purpose of a U.S. passport if you have open borders? So let me give you an example, and I think people will really relate to this. A lot of people travel internationally. They'll fly to Atlanta, Washington, D.C., New York, and they'll go to, let's just say they fly to London or Europe for a vacation or something. Well, why would you ever show your passport to leave the country or come back in the country and go through that whole process when you could fly into Mexico City, take a car and literally, walk across the border on 4 states, so to speak, even though you don't want to do that.
Right.
The point of the matter is it's a joke. On one side of the country, you're being forced to get in a line, go through immigration, answer questions, show your passport, get scanned. On the other side of the country, there is no border control. So which is it? Do we have a sovereign nation or do we not? And that's really the biggest, it's almost it's comical's not the word. It's just, it's a contradiction in the rule of law, but it's a contradiction into the sovereignty of the United States. Okay, when you open your borders wholesale, you don't have a country.
No, and you don't have a country, and you certainly don't have control. And Jenny Biddle, thank you for tuning in. She said, why even bother with security at the airports when our borders are open? It'll be easier for terrorists to come through our borders than our airports. The modern liberal logic is going to be our demise if we allow this to continue. And any path of least resistance is where they will go. She's absolutely right.
Yeah, absolutely. And so therefore, is the U.S. passport worthless? If we have open borders, it is.
Right.
Is U.S. citizenship worthless? If we have open borders and we have essentially, what we're going to go to here if this continues, let me put it to you this way, since I've worked so many years overseas, I can tell you, 20% on average, if you go to Africa, you go to the emerging market countries, 10 to 20% of the population essentially pays all the bills, pays all the taxes for 80% of the population. And therefore, you have essentially a 80% black market economy. That's where the liberal left wants to take the U.S. into what I'll call a black market economy, where essentially, there's a small group of people who basically pay the rent, pay all the bills, pay the taxes, and support the rest, and everybody else is on some form of social welfare. And that's the only way you can keep this model up. And the problem is when that breaks down, then you have, civil insurrection, because at some point somebody's going to say, why am I paying for essentially millions and millions and millions of illegal immigrants when basically, I'm my family, my company, or, a group of us are essentially doing everything right by the law, by the Constitution. So that's what I think is happening. And I think we're going to see, I don't say civil insurrection. I think we're going to see a civil discourse over this whole process going into 2022, the elections, because this is not sustainable, Casey.
It's not. And I'll be curious to see what happens with Arizona, New Mexico, and Texas, and particularly Arizona and Texas, how red they will turn under Trump's administration, the borders were tightened up, and now under Biden, it's just the opposite. And they are on the front lines of the illegal immigrants that are crossing over. So it's going to be really interesting to watch, and hopefully people will vote smart and understand what they're voting for in 2024. That's 4 years off. And I think that immigration policy is going to be at the forefront if this open border continues.
Well, this is, for lack of better terms, let's put it this way for the listeners. And I wish we could say we were in the, you and I were in the bunker, so to speak, with the liberal leftist handlers of Biden and Harris, who really run the country today. But this is a planned strategy. They seem to think that this is their strategy, okay, for the next 2 years, because they've made it front and center. Now, is it a winning strategy? Absolutely not. It's an absolute losing strategy on paper. Is it a winning strategy for them when it comes to elections? And with HR 1, which of course is what they're trying to federalize the elections and really take control of, the whole, kind of manhandle the national elections. Maybe that's what their whole strategy is here, Casey, which is if you look at what's happening in Washington, HR 1, let's get, while we have control, let's grab for everything we can. Okay. We're talking about the liberal agenda. And look, the Rhino Republicans are sitting there letting it happen. Let's be clear. I mean, let's not give hall passes, right? The fake Republicans are letting it happen. They give minimal resistance, right?
Well,
so maybe the agenda is for the next 2 years, just flood the borders, push HR 1, try to federalize the elections, and then, really hope and pray that they can, over time, basically create such a powerful liberal voting base that, the conservative, Republican, constitutional element would never, ever have a chance of a majority element in the government again. That seems to be their strategy.
well, and KW, think about it, and this is exactly what you're saying with all these migrants coming over the border. So in 3 or 4 years, they end up letting them legally vote. Who are they going to vote for, Democrat or Republican? They're going to vote for the party of the president that allowed them to come over undocumented.
That's exactly right. And by the way, they're going to vote whether they're slaves or not, indentured or not. They will vote because they're, that's going to happen, in any form. But of course, again, there'll be, then we get into the balloting issue of, how many ballots are sent out, et cetera. That's another discussion we can have. But you're absolutely right. The cheap votes, cheap labor in one form or another. And then, of course, all of the human trafficking and all of the human crisis that goes with it. But here's the thing that people need to grab onto. You and I have to pay for this, okay? You and I, meaning the American citizens, have to pay for this. And by the way, we are, okay? The bills are racking up every day. And it's the cost for just one of these people, because look, even if they're handled, even if they're indentured and the slaves, whoever's doing that is going to basically go out and siphon every dollar they can from the U.S. government for these people in the form of social welfare, Medicare, Medicaid, whatever they can get, food, stamps, whatever's available, they're going to grab it in the name of these people. And that's where all the fraud is. Majority of the fraud in the U.S. federal government outside of defense contracts are in the social welfare system. And that's only going to triple and quadruple here the next 4 or 5 years. So when you look at our national debt, okay, remember I talked to you about the $5 trillion that they're just doing it on paper. Well, that's nothing compared to what's coming from the social cost. That hasn't even been factored into the equation. They're just talking about spending money, $5 trillion, just to spend it. The poor to keep themselves in office. Mm-hmm. Wait till the social welfare bills come due the next 5 or 10 years to the American people. That's going to be staggering.
There's so much cost. The other thing, I heard it on Brian Mudd. I tried to look up the statistic. I couldn't find it. But right now with FEMA and the federal government having to house all these illegal migrants, and especially they're looking for places for these unaccompanied children, they're building housing for them. And it's to hold them in. And they said, Brian Mudd gave a statistic of $70,000 per person to be able to build additional housing. And I think we just lost KW. Give me 1 second here. All right, KW, are you back with us?
I'm with you. Yes, sorry about that. The numbers.
Hold on 1 second, KW. We've got to get you back on air. Okay, you should be good.
Yeah, sorry about that. Casey, the numbers for the housing are staggering because, look, whenever you outsource, all of these things, I know it sounds trivial, but when you add it up, the independent contractors are raping the federal government right now on everything to provide, whatever they're providing, whether it's, silver blankets, these little, like, you see these silver blankets with these kids in there. They're kind of like the blankets that the astronauts use. The bedding, all of the clothing. I mean, you're paying for it. We're paying for it. The federal government doesn't keep that in stock. They go out and do an RFP, an immediate urgent RFP with no controls over how much they pay, right? These are just on the spot RFPs. And basically people bid, and then they just select it. So the amount of money that's going out the door right now is astronomical. It's not just the $85 million for hotel rooms. It's hundreds and hundreds of millions. And, well, it's really going to be in the billions when it's all said, but it's hundreds and hundreds of millions for all of the ancillaries that go to take care of this. Okay, it's out of control, and the American people, need to understand this is a big bill coming due.
And I'll tell you too, with the CBP, they're on the front lines there at the border, and it's super tough for them because they're charged to protect the United States, but you have these children that are coming over, and they're there to take care of them because they're coming over, they're starving, they're frightened. To let you know where they're coming from, it's Guatemala, El Salvador, Honduras, and then the rest of them are from Mexico, but mainly the first three, Guatemala, El Salvador, and Honduras, I think is about 75% of the children. So these border agents are saying, we're not mistreating the children, we're doing the best we can with them, but they have such an influx of kids. I think it's over 19,000 that they're working with so far this year. It's an incredible, staggering number. And like you said, there's going to be social costs that are just starting today. But, what's the solution when you're opening the borders like this and with all these children? I mean, what is the solution? You have education?
We're not catching everybody, Casey.
No.
I mean, we're only talking about those that either turn themselves in or are caught, by Border Patrol. I mean, I can tell you, down on the Arizona border, it's wide open. There are spots where the Border Patrol has, what we call control stations. But let's make sure everybody understands. The Biden-Harris administration has shut down all of the intelligence and support, we'll call it the counterintelligence and support activities that were in place. The drones aren't flying. There's no counterintelligence on all the tunnels that already exist on the California side, okay, in the Mexico-California area. There's no electronic surveillance. Essentially, the border is wide open. Okay, you can go out to sections on the Arizona border. You and I could just go to Mexico for a vacation if we want to walk. And
Crazy.
come back. It's just that bad. So, remember, the numbers are much higher than even the Border Patrol or ICE or anybody else will tell you, Homeland Security, because they don't know what they don't know. And the reality is they're gaping open community holes, not just in the wall, but, areas like Arizona. The reason I'm in Arizona is because that's the heavy drug cartel region, okay, because of the open terrain. And so you don't just have a gap in a wall. You have, hundreds of miles of this open space.
Which was another
They're active.
Which was another executive order from Biden to stop building the wall that Trump had started.
Well, and also suspend all of the counterintelligence activity. Okay, so everybody needs to understand, it's not just putting up a panel or some panels to finish the wall. It's all of the associated counterintelligence activities that go with it. So they're flying blind. And then the last piece of it, to your point, is, the Border Patrol has been turned into social welfare agents, because they've had to stop doing their day-to-day job and basically become nannies for essentially the kids that are being muled over to keep them off their feet so they can run the drugs and run the bad actors through the gaps in the border. So remember, it's not who you see coming, it's who you don't see coming that's really the issue.
Absolutely right, and that's the frightening thought of this conversation. KW, you've been out there since the beginning of the week. How much longer do you think you'll stay out there, and what are your plans? I know that you put America first. That's your goal, America first.
Yeah, well, so so we wanted to. We started at the border. We're working our way up into central Arizona. We're trying to follow the caravan, so to speak. Although they get the reality is they break off into small groups and they just kind of disappear. They dissipate. And that's because they have people who pick them up and grab them and move them elsewhere. I'm talking the adult age, boys and girls that are not in a facility or not being processed. Now, remember, they're not even processing anymore. They're just basically releasing. They're not even documenting, saying, they're not even saying to a certain point, you know, fingerprinting, taking a picture, maybe taking a DNA sample, and then pushing these immigrants out into the street, saying, you know, you're supposed to come back in 18 months for a hearing. They're not even doing that. So, and that's a joke as well. Catch and release, even when you document them, is a joke because you never find them again, right?
You're right.
They have to be doing a criminal event, and be arrested, and if you had them in the database, then a law enforcement agency could run it in a national database and say, oh, Miguel came in and he was supposed to go to an immigration hearing, but he failed to show up, and theoretically that's when they're supposed to be turned over to ICE. But nobody gets turned over anymore to ICE, as you know. So the whole thing is just wide open. Now, what we're doing now is we're going to be heading back down to the border again, down to Cochise County, and work with the sheriff down there, the sheriff's department, to just really, get some real inside information on what they're really doing. Because, the news channels come out and they do their flyby, right? Fox News, CNN, and others. I'm not really interested in the flyby. We want to know, okay, well, what's really happening, with the drug trade here? What's really happening, with the potential for terrorists to come across the border? So we'll be providing some updates on that when we get there and when that happens.
Well, that'll be very, very interesting, and excited to hear what you find out down there, because certainly being boots on the ground is the best way to obtain information, and appreciate you being out there to share with the rest of us what you're seeing and what you're hearing on the ground. And, that's just one state and one area where
right.
People are coming over. So definitely it's an alarming conversation today, KW. What can people do?
Well, I mean, look, if I were an American citizen, I would basically be blowing up my congressional and senators' email, phone mail, voicemail, and you've got to basically make it clear to your congressional representative and your federal senator that if they don't act, and I don't care what party they're part of, Democrat, Republican, Independent, if they don't act, that in 2022, if they're up for re-election, they're gone. That's the only way. You've got to make it in their self-interest, even though they should be doing this by virtue of the U.S. Constitution, which they're sworn to uphold. But of course, they're not doing it. So you've got to make this personal. You've got to make this personal with the congressional representative in your county, your district, in your state. In Florida, of course, we have two senators who they waffle, let's call it what it is. And we have a mixed bag of tricks when it comes to our congressional representatives. But you've got to basically pressure your congressional representatives and your senatorial reps and make it clear, look, if you don't stand up and force and demand, even though the left has control of Congress, and basically make it the most miserable experience for them that we've ever seen, then we're gonna vote you out. We're gonna primary you if we have to. We're going to remove you from office in 2022, 2024 when you're up for re-election. That's what people have to do, because it's all about personal interest today. And it's a sad statement, Casey, because you would think that every congressional representative and every senatorial representative would be looking at this like, okay, this is totally against the Constitution. This is totally against the rule of law, and this is an illegal act by the current government. But they aren't, and that's the problem. And that's the only thing I can say is it's a federal issue. It's got to be done at the congressional and Senate level.
And KW, that's for everybody. It's not just border states. Every one of us need to talk about this to our legislative representatives. And even if you're in Tupelo, Mississippi, it's important to talk to your congressional representative, because it is a federal decision, and all of them vote on these issues. I just can't get over the fact that our borders are open. We don't know who's coming across, and the left has made it a humanitarian issue, right? It's about saving people from poverty or from dictatorships, and they've made it a humanitarian issue, but it's so much larger than that, and that's what frightens especially you and I. It's not just the humanitarian aspect. The United States has a legal route to enter our country. You do have to apply for asylum, and they will hear those cases. But opening the borders and just letting people in, we don't know, as you said, who's coming.
Well, that's the biggest concern. Again, look. I mean, we have to call this what it is. This is not a humanitarian aid. This is humanitarian human trafficking, for lack of better terms. We are, as a nation, fostering human trafficking.
We are.
Nobody's coming from a war zone. Okay, nobody's coming from torture. Not to be rude about it, but they were interviewing one of the female, legal age migrants, and basically she was obese, overweight, looked extremely healthy, from a standpoint of having been fed. And they asked her, "Why are you coming to the U.S.?" And she said she was starving.
Right.
You get my point. So,
Right.
So these are economic refugees. These are not refugees from a war-torn nation
Right.
status. Okay?
Right.
So let's be clear. And then number two, for them to get across the border, they have to basically pay the rent. And because they don't have the money, they are basically signing some form of human contract, indenture contract. Not a contract like we would think, but they're basically being documented on the other side by the bad actors, and they are being told, if you don't do what we tell you to do, if you don't help us on the other side when you get in, we're going to kill somebody. Your family member is going to get killed, or we'll probably kill you. That's the way it is, and people need to understand. This is not romper room. This is real world. These people are being brought over, but they're owned, they're controlled, and they have to repay their masters, and the masters are the drug cartels.
And the drug cartels hold back at nothing, especially, we've heard the nightmare stories out of Mexico, the drug cartels that murder and behead and bury people for any reason or no reason, very frightening. And you think that these children, underage minors, and even the girl you spoke about, she's probably a young woman, what a place to be put in. And we're allowing that to happen as a country by opening the borders like this. We're allowing these kids to be controlled by these drug lords. And I'm sure there's some that are here for reasons other than that, but we have to look at the picture as a whole. And even those that are crossing over just for a better life, they still need to be documented, KW.
Well, that's the other concern, Casey, is that now with the there's catch and release, and then there's basically just cut them loose, and there's no DNA test. There's for the DNA test, for people's benefit, they swab you. They put a swab. It's just a swab, and they put it in a central database. There's no swab. There's no fingerprinting. There's no photographs. There's nothing. So basically, it's as if you never even saw them. So why even catch them and bring them? And that's what they're doing. The Border Patrol saying, look, we don't have any place to put them, so we may round them up on the highway and then just say, okay, keep going. And well, what's the point? I mean, what? It's out of control from a standpoint of the sovereignty of the United States. I mean, we basically are being. I can tell you this. I want everybody here. I've worked overseas almost my entire life. We're being laughed at by the rest of the world. But by banana republics, we're being laughed at because at least they protect their border. They understand that they're poor countries and they cannot allow, essentially migrants in their country because they already have impoverished. Look at what Hungary did, okay, during the crisis where basically all of the North African and Middle East refugees that were being smuggled by the European cartels out of North Africa into Greece and then all the way through up into Europe, right? You remember that? Well, Hungary said, you know what? We're really a poor country. We really can't afford these people. They built a fence, a wall around Hungary on the spot. They didn't hesitate. And they put a board, and they said that when they were coming through Serbia into Hungary, they didn't let them. They wouldn't let them, stay. They kept pushing them north. So, and of course, the immigrants knew that their ticket was Germany because that's where they got free housing, free food. They got all the social welfare. And Merkel let millions of undocumented, unvetted Syrian and North African refugees in, and Germany is paying the price for it today with crime. Criminal syndicates, rapes, murders, and these are facts. These are not fictional items, and that's what you get when you do this. In addition to the hardened terrorists who you don't know about, that you don't know what their target's going to be. It's USA Inc., and we just don't know where they're going to hit us. That's the tragedy that's unfolding that we cannot see today, that we will see over the coming years.
And that's a very, I would say, a pretty good, accurate assumption that that's what will happen. When you let what illegal person come through, and I don't mean just any illegal. I mean the ones that are the bad actors, the drug lords, the ones that are want to put together gangs. You let them come over. What else can happen, KW, other than they will continue to break the law and the rules? And the only thing is we don't even know who they are. And if we're lucky enough to catch them, that's about the only way to stop them. And that's one person at a time in jail. But we're talking millions are coming over. It's just impossible to round up the entire group of bad actors, let's say.
And also let's remember the biggest drug trade right now. The most dangerous drug trade to the United States citizens is fentanyl. It's a deadly, deadly drug, and marijuana is on the path to being legalized. Cannabis, in most states, in some form, but this fentanyl trade, remember that's a Chinese-driven drug trade, and that's Chinese-sponsored by the Chinese Communist government. Okay, that nothing like that happens of that magnitude because it's billions of dollars without the Chinese Communist Party controlling it, okay? So when you really look at what's happening on the drug trade, people need to understand that the United States government has basically opened the borders to unencumbered fentanyl smuggling into the United States, okay? Essentially at the behest of the Chinese government, with collusion of the major Mexican drug cartels. In other words, they get a piece of the action, and that's billions and billions of dollars. That is catastrophic. Okay, if we thought methamphetamines and we thought all of the other drugs in the heartlands of the U.S. were bad, wait till you see the impact of what this open border fentanyl trade is going to do to the U.S. Okay, to our young people, and I don't think people really understand how bad that is.
No, and today it's fentanyl. Tomorrow it'll be something else. There's always going to be something coming over the border that we have to, watch out for. And I agree with you completely. What seems insane to me, and the definition of insanity is, we knew that the catch and release program was a failing program. It didn't work. We got rid of it. And here we are trying it again. And this is, right now it truly is a border crisis in terms of the sheer number of illegal immigrants that are crossing the border, in terms of the children, in terms of the drug trafficking and human trafficking. So the whole thing is a disaster. Again, it's insane that we have reinstituted the catch and release. And like you said, it's really not even that. It's just come on in and release.
Well, it's kind of like just, pass through. It's not even a catch and release. It's a pass through because they're doing zero documentation. So at some point when one of these immigrants, one of these criminals does something bad, kills somebody, okay, or gets involved. A lot of these immigrants, have DUI accidents, for example. So they'll, whatever county, state across the country that happens, they'll pull their records, and there is no record, Casey. There's no fingerprint. There's nothing. So they basically are not even illegal immigrants. They're just completely they're ghosts, okay, and that's that. Since when did we become a nation of ghosts, right? Since when did we become a nation of, again, I go back to it. What is U.S. citizenship worth? What is the U.S. passport worth if we don't have, a proper immigration system?
Betty from Tupelo said, we need to determine and publish the reason for the Republicans and Democrats supporting current border situation, expose their motives. Chaos is making many people in the world very, very happy, probably due to money bribes from cartels and rich Democrats. Thank you for tuning in, Betty. And she's right.
The money is the money in this particular situation is clearly in the billions, and it goes across all spectrums. We've got terrorist link money, we've got drug trade money, and we've got human trafficking money. It's all bad, and it's unbelievable that we basically allowed this country to fall into the gutter, and all of a sudden in a matter of months, we've gone to some form of stability and rule of law to essentially chaos. And that's what it is. And for those that are sitting in Nebraska, Ohio, Oklahoma, it's coming. And, and they already have felt it in the past. But it's these people are not staying on the borders. And that's the message. And the drugs are not staying on the border. And the terrorists are not staying on the border. They're going into the highly dense packed cities, and they're going to do bad things.
And Betty's absolutely right. We need to figure out which Democrats, which Republicans are supporting this type of immigration policy. This is the only way for us as people to control this is to vote in the right people, and that is vetting the right candidates, making sure that they are going to support a strong border policy rather than an open border policy. So, KW, we are wrapping right up through our hour, and appreciate you calling in here from Arizona. You've been on the ground there all week. There's a lot more work ahead. We're anxious to hear about it. Can people follow you during the week? Are you posting updates? I think that you are on some other pages that they understand. For example, after you meet with the sheriff, if you have an update.
Absolutely, yeah. Well, they can go to the America First Facebook page. It's it's easy to find as KW Miller America First, and whenever we have an update worthwhile, we'll push it out there. And so, it's we're real easy. KW Miller America First on Facebook.
Well, folks, thank you so much for tuning in this week. This is KC and KW. KW is from Arizona, reporting from Arizona. I'm here in Stuart, Florida, just off the banks of our St. Lucie River. And if you have a topic you would like to discuss, drop us a note. We'd love to discuss it. Talk about anything politics. We just want America first, and we want to make sure that we are electing the right people, conservative people, to represent us. And that's really the focus of our show. Is we really need to make sure we're vetting the right people, because if we don't, this is what happens. Chaos, legislation that makes no sense, and frankly, it's going to cost you and I a lot of money. So primarily, that's what our shows are going to be about. We're here every Thursday beginning at 10 a.m. for an hour, and we're here on the YouTube channel, Facebook Live, and love to talk about our America and how we're going to bring it back to America first and keeping it a good conservative country. KW, anything else?
No, I think Casey, thanks so much for patching me in from the hinterlands, and look forward to being back in the studio with you when I return, and we'll put some updates out in the meantime.
Very good. Well, folks, thank you so much again for tuning in, and hope to see you again next Thursday beginning at 10 a.m. Take care now. Have a good week.